Including the princess, the fakes had made the Greenhalghs over 800,000 pounds. But unlike most criminals, they don't appear to have been driven by money.
I think it was possibly summed up by George at one point when I asked why he hadn't spent some of the money, and he turned around to me and said, well, he said, in that drawer there, he said, I've got 6 pairs of socks I've never worn. What else do I need? And that was the way they lived. They lived their life as if they didn't have this money, and they had enough to eat, and they had enough to drink, and they had a house with a roof over their head, and what else did they need?
Their reasons for making the fakes go back further in time and appear rooted in the Greenhalghs' bizarre personalities. In his younger years, George was a character in the local pubs and had a reputation for telling fantastical stories. It seems George had been conning the experts as far back as the 60s. Then he discovered the remarkable talents of his youngest son, Sean. Together, they retreated into the family home, becoming virtual recluses for the next 30 years.
We moved in next door to him in 1967. I more or less saw Sean every day. But when we left in 74, as for in the next 25 years, I think I only saw him 3 or 4 times. I don't think he ever went out. He certainly weren't one for local pubs round here. Well, I wouldn't describe him as a mummy's boy, but he's always lived at home. I don't know if he's ever worked. I don't guess, but his home environment, I think, is the only environment he's ever known.
I think the reason I've done it, it's my lifestyle. I have no friends. I never go out to bother anybody. It's just I find people difficult to deal with.
Sean had tried to become a painter when he was in his 20s. It appears that after that, his whole life became devoted to making the forgeries.
I've tried for years to make my way in my own name. Nobody were interested if it was ancient or it had a name in it. They were all eyes and ears.
He started to suggest at the very least that he did it because he could, because he was an artist who had been rejected, and because he had a hatred of money, the art market, and possibly anyone from the south of England as well. He felt that he had been rejected because he was from Bolton, and that he would never become a recognised artist, and he'd never get a job in the art trade because he was from Bolton.
Sean had his revenge, but as his trial approached, more revelations would come, putting a last sting in the tail of the family's remarkable story.
Are his paintings any good? I mean, do the experts say that the paintings are... I mean, here I am asking you about experts when they've just bamboozled the whole bloody lot of them, haven't they? I mean, it's brilliant, really, isn't it?
When the Greenhalghs were brought to trial, it was the end of a 17-year run that had seen them dupe some of the world's top art dealers, auction houses, and museums. At the last minute, Sean's parents, who'd always denied any wrongdoing, changed their pleas to guilty.
In court, it was evident from the prosecution that George was very much the brains of the outfit. He was described as the salesman, that he had ideas tied to those pieces of provenance that he had acquired or manufactured, and that Sean was sent away to make the corresponding artefact in the garden shed, as it was described. That seems to imply that that was very much the case, that Sean pretty much did. He was the man with the talent, but he did as he was told.
Sean had said that the forgeries were his idea all along, and George's defense claimed that when he sold the fakes, he was simply following orders.
George was a fantasist in my mind. He had created these stories for the objects, but he also had told great stories himself. He was saying that his grandmother had owned an art gallery. He was saying that people in his family knew Lowry, they knew Gauguin, they knew everybody. He had a huge collection of medals that he'd been presented, and we found letters that he'd written to various countries describing his actions during the war and asking for the presentation of medals that he had not got. And I mean, I just believe that there was too many medals there for any one person to possibly have acquired. From just about every campaign in the Second World War, George Greenhouse had a medal.
To the best of my remembrance, the last time just before he was sentenced, he said something like, Judge Morris asked him if he could hear, and he said, no, not really, because I've got 2 bullets in my head and 1 in my spine from the Italian campaign.
Would you like to know where George Greenhouse did spend his war years?
If you told me he spent his war years in a kitchen in Catterick, I wouldn't be surprised, but yes, please do tell me.
He spent them in prison.
Oh.
As a deserter.
So he actually was called up or joined up and then deserted subsequently? And he spent the whole of the 6-year period in prison? I'm astonished.
Are you?
Well, I suppose I am and I'm not in a way. It fits in with the rest of the pattern, doesn't it?
The judge said that he wanted to give George a custodial sentence, but because of his age and apparent disability, no prison in Britain could take him.
What do you think about what happened?
There'll be something done about it, don't worry.
Could it be that George has had the last laugh, having fooled not just the experts, but also the judicial system?
Well, he was never in a wheelchair for the court case. That was the only time I ever saw him in a wheelchair.
What did you think when you saw that?
Well, the mind boggles, isn't it?
George and Olive are now back at home in Bolton. Since their return, the family has destroyed Sean's shed, the workshop where he'd made the fakes that had beguiled the world. For his efforts, Sean got 4.5 years in prison.
It's tempting for people, you know, looking at this story now, finding out what went on here, to say to themselves, well, the art world, a bunch of cocky, stuck-up know-alls, but they don't know, and isn't it great this bloke pulled a fast one on them and they're fools for falling for it. So I don't think the art world should be blamed in any way for falling for it. A far, far fairer thing to do here is to praise this man, you know, for this world-class forgery he's pulled off. You know, Sean Greenhouse up there in Bolton, I salute you.
I propose a toast to the Greenhouses. Good health to Greenhouse.
Good health to.
How much more did he do? We don't know, do we? And it's good on him, really. Yeah. It amuses me to think that there are people now gazing in on some exhibition, looking at some of his stuff, thinking that they're genuine. Yeah, knocked up on a
Top of the screen, it's unbelievable.
Carry on carving.
Yeah, carry on carving.